here for over 100 years. They came here to build the railroads in the 1850s, and they've stayed. They consider themselves Kenyan. However, they live very secluded lives compared to Black Kenyans. They build apartment complex and housing units and rent only to other Indians and do not rent to the Black population. And my cousin does not think that is racism. Of course, I think that is just straight 100% racism. She thinks that because they buy the land for their community with their own Indian money, and they build for their community, rent only to their community, they're just taking advantage of what the Kenyan government allows them, which of course is a problem because the Kenyan government does allow this. However, whichever way you spin it, it's racism, even if the Black Kenyans choose to do the same thing to the Indian Kenyans, as she says. I think it's racism whichever way you look at it. She thinks racism really only applies when an Indian is hiring a Black Kenyan for a job, and for the same qualifications, they are paying them a lesser salary than the Indians. So that's racism to her. But the other way is just taking advantage of, I guess, essentially a loophole. Tell me what you guys think, because I think it's all wrong.
Indians in Africa, and especially in Kenya, we all know your ancestors were brought into these lands to come and build the railway line by the British. After the British left, you guys stayed to be part of us, which was only fair because you guys deserve to be here. But please, help me beg the older generation of Indians in Kenya to stop being racist towards the Kenyan people, towards the Black. Pay Black people the same wages you pay your own kind for the same services offered. A lot of Kenyans are suffering in EPZ, industrial area, and all the industries that are Indian owned because they're being treated very brutally. There's a lot of racism.
Hello to everyone. All that said, why do Indians hate Black people? Before one can answer this question, perhaps it is worth revisiting and try to understand why there are so many Indians in Africa. If you have been to East Africa, then this question makes sense. Pre-colonial Indo-African relations. India and Africa have over a 3,000-year history of cultural and commercial relations. Sources from India show evidence of trade and contact between the Dravidians and Babylonians dating back to the 17th century. The evidence has been interpreted to understand Indian merchants and sailors having visited southern Arabia, situated on the eastern part of the Horn of Africa, also known as the Somali Peninsula. Additionally, Indian coastal communities developed profitable ties with East Africa, East Asia, and Central Asia in pre-colonial times. The trade diaspora was unique as it consisted largely of temporary and circular migration. The second wave F migration into Africa by Indians came as a result of colonization. Major clusters of Indians were taken as indentured laborers across colonial empires in the 19th and early 20th century. Indentured Indian laborers replaced freed slaves in plantation economies. The stark contrast between the first trade wave was that migration during colonial rule was that migration was forced, not voluntary. It is also worth noting that some Indians migrated as teachers, clerks to serve colonial governments overseas. This expanded colonial rule. As Indians were being displaced to Africa, many Africans also were displaced to India. Africans were living under forced labor in India. To date, you can find the Siddhis, Africans Indians, living around the western coast and hinterland in cities like Gujarat, Goa, and Janjira. There are about 400 Siddhis in Mumbai. Today, the Indian diaspora in Africa is estimated to be over 3 million people, spread across various countries on the continent. The historical roots of this migration and ongoing connections between India and African nations continue to influence the demographics and cultural landscapes of many African countries. Now, to answer the question, why do East African Indians hate Africans? I am going to be brutally honest. This is not intended to hurt anyone. I have been to East Africa, and based on my observations on Indians, I notice they are very anti-African to an extent they segregate themselves from Africans. Why is this so? You are right. Most of the Indians in East Africa are yet to outgrow their racist tendencies. Their attitude that they are superior and well-off than Africans generally hinders them from realizing their potential. Indians, like Somalis, segregate themselves and live in self-imposed island in the East African society. They live in exclusive houses, attend exclusive schools, attend their own temples, and trade with their own business enterprises. Even though this exclusiveness might be helpful to their community, they miss out a lot on other aspects of the wider society. For instance, they are unable to have a say in politics and national leadership matters. Some other races like Europeans, Americans, and British have integrated much better than Indians. Indians in East Africa are to blame for their racist attitudes, which hinders them from seeing good and beauty in other races. Let us quickly revisit India. India has a caste class system which seems to be acceptably still allowed in the 21st century. The caste system is detrimental economically and societally. Rich and poor, high caste and low caste, educated and uneducated, high and low, famous and unfamous, good jobs versus menial jobs, still alive and well, powerful and unpowerful exists in India. Sadly, that is exported to other countries unapologetically. Gandhi himself called Africans Kafirs, meaning infidels, when he was in South Africa. Mandela was well aware of the racist statements made by Gandhi. Mandela asked for Gandhi to be forgiven. I cannot stress enough, not all Indians hold Africans with disdain. Okay, let us move on. Please may I ask you to subscribe if you have not done it already. I am depending on you to support the channel. Thank you. The real answer to this question would be somewhere in the ideas that came with the British colonization and standards of beauty that the British held and spread as they colonized India. India, as with most of the world for whatever reason, there is a strange obsession with fair skin. By the way, India remains one of the top countries that produces and imports bleaching creams. And wanting so badly to be European, that means adopting European cultures and customs. The further you go north of India, you will see this cultural assimilation as individuals drop their ethnic identities and customs in favor of becoming or identifying with British culture. You can find a brown Indian claim to have olive or fair skin. Just like other Asian countries, Indians hold this ignorant belief that having a fair skin is a symbol of high class and wealth and beauty. The aforementioned ideas, at least in India, are a byproduct of British colonization and European expansion. For instance, in Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea, they see this idea that the poor people worked in the fields became black because of the sun. India has an interesting culture that is steeped in their multifaceted religious beliefs. Remember that India is part of China, but would rather engage with the British and Europe rather than its own sister, or should I say mother country, China. Many cultures around the world exclude one particular group of people from functioning as full members of society, as in this case. In India, their whole society excludes people because of ignorant, prejudiced beliefs. Does that sound familiar? India, just like in the United States of America and several European countries do. Here is this idiotic belief that dark-skinned people measure below average intelligence. So basically, the Indian government believes there is no reason to open up universities to the black-skinned members of their society. The government also sees no reason to give the 83% of its population with skin that's on the darker end of the spectrum adequate sanitation. India doesn't advance from this mentality because their leaders are just doing what they see other countries doing, which is suppressing the poor. I have met many Indian men and women of whom are brilliant in many fields such as mathematics, computer science, medicine, business, and chemistry. It does not matter how well educated one is. If you do have dark complexion, no one will be interested, and you will never be able to move to the top of your field because of the silly caste system. Imagine being excluded from high office because you are darker, or if you happen to come from economically challenged family, that because of an oppressive class system that forces you to always be that way, no progress. The bottom line is that India seemingly suppresses its own dark-skinned citizens, with segregation and inequality who make up majority of its people. So why would they not do the same to Afro-Black people? The most alarming element of Indian racism is that many Indians are very often open about their hatred, which is frowned upon and rare in the British society. I believe that most Indians are racist, but this will change in future generations.